My question is on the embryo adoption that we may have some differences in the Christian community on. I personally have an issue with it. You had mentioned surrogacy is wrong, and it seems to fall into that category for me. I don't doubt the intentions of those who want to adopt at an early age, but in the Bible, there is conceived and begat. Not just conception, and God knitting together in the womb, that the womb is inviolate, and you have this husband and wife, and the only third party involved is God himself. And so that's a hard issue. And wanted your thoughts on embryo adoption, the biblical answer, not the emotional plea or concern.
Yeah. I talk about embryo adoption in the book. If you want the cheat sheet, at the Federalist, I wrote an article called Why Embryo Adoption Damages Children's Rights. I think that's what it's called. So let me just lay this out. This is the strange hybrid between the baby-making marketplace and the child-centric world of adults accepting hardship on behalf of kids, right? So this is a little complicated. So let me just zoom out and say, right now there's about 1 million frozen embryos in this country, 1 million. By some estimates, 20 to 40% have been functionally abandoned. So nobody's paying their storage fees. They can't find the mom or dad or the commissioning parents, because who knows if they're the genetically related parents or not. So we have really a human rights crisis on our hands in frozen storage right now. So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, which is sort of the authority on reproductive technologies from the medical world, they have 3 recommendations for what to do with surplus embryos. The first one is thaw and discard, which I'm like, thaw and discard yourself. I mean, you can thaw, make decisions about your own body, right? Second one is donate to research. I'm like, well, donate yourself to research, The third one is donate to another couple. So if you're looking at this through the lens of children have a right to life and children have a right to their mother and father, these 3 options are problematic, okay? Because they're going to violate the child's right to life or violate the child's right to their mother and father. What is the solution to surplus embryos? It is the same solution to pregnancy in general. The first, if there's an unplanned pregnancy, the solution is not adoption. The solution is parenting. That's the solution. When you create a baby, you parent the baby, whether that is in the traditional way of making babies or the technical way of lab-created babies. If you made those babies, they are your babies. Go get them, put them in your womb, give them a shot at life. Yes, I understand you're going to have to buy a 12-passenger van. You're going to have to take out a loan. Your mother might have to move in with you. But actually, protecting children's right to life and right to their mother and father costs all of us at some point. So we first need to get this mentality right. It's not somebody else's problem to go get the frozen babies in storage. It's the people that made the babies who have the obligation to care for those babies. So what do you do with the babies that have been abandoned? What do you do with the ones whose parents have died? Because it's been 30 years, right? Or there are some, right, like you gave me the face. There's a couple who adopted 2 embryos. They adopted a batch of embryos, the oldest embryos ever to be adopted and gestated, and they had 2 healthy children last year. And they did it specifically with the pro-life mentality. They said, we're not going to go for the kids. We're going to go for the kids that are the most unwanted. The oldest ones, the ones that I think that was the creation of an egg donor. The biological father was in his 80s, right? So the genetic mother, who knows if they'll ever know who they are. The genetic dad will be dead by the time they're teenagers. They said, we're going to go get the kids that are the least wanted, which actually is the right way to think about this. This is adults doing hard things on behalf of kids. Right now, I think that there's less than 1,000 embryo adoptions per year. So embryo adoption is not going to solve the problem of surplus embryos. And if you read the book, or if you read the article at the Federalist, I quote several kids who only were created through sperm donation or only created through egg donation, who were not the process of both donor egg and sperm or raised by unrelated people altogether. They have incredible concerns that the promotion of embryo adoption is going to just further this licentious practice of creating as many embryos as you want, right? That if there's this mentality of, oh, it's okay, surplus embryos can be donated to somebody else, no big deal, right? Let's just keep creating them. The psychological impact on these kids is, the psychological impact on kids who are raised by their biological mother and who have a sperm donor are hard enough. The best study on that is called My Daddy's Name is Donor. You can find that on our website. But to have both of the parents unrelated, maybe deceased, maybe one of them was a donor anyway, very, very slim chance of them making a connection with their first family. People that are adopting these embryos need to go into it with a massive, above and beyond shepherding mindset. I am here to bear the burden of these children. It's not the mentality of frozen baby, we can give them a home and a womb, ding, problem solved. You're going to be walking these children through the most dystopic scenarios, the most existential questions. So as a last resort, if the parents are dead, if they literally cannot bear this child, embryo donation is not the way to go because we don't donate people. Embryo adoption is the way to go. And then you treat these children just like you would treat children in the current adoption process, where you adopt sibling groups so that they can stay with their genetic siblings whenever possible. The adults go through all the screening and vetting and background checks and home studies that traditional adoptive parents have to go through. And then they go into it with the same mentality that adoptive parents today go into, which is helping their children understand the life. What are the words that are used in our home study? Walking with our children as they understand adoption at the different phases in this lifelong development and understanding of their origins, or something like that, right? You are there to shepherd your children through the loss, and people doing it with embryo adoption are going to face that in ways we've never seen before. So in general, I don't endorse the embryo adoption model because it fuels this creation of surplus embryos. But when there are no other options, embryo adoption is the most child-friendly option that there is.
Really, I'll be as brief as I can be. I want to give people a little hope. The everything you're speaking of in terms of the statistics, I've lived it out. I'm a Gen Xer who was raised by a single mom in the 70s. My mom had 5 husbands. She had a number of live-in boyfriends. It was a pretty chaotic childhood. And what I want to say here is that despite the odds, I'm standing here today, married father of 4, married 35 years, got 3 grandchildren, 1 more on the way. I don't know who prayed for me back in 1971 or whatever it was, but that prayer made a difference. The odds are such that I'm still dealing with the consequences and the ramifications of those choices. Some of the things you said today triggered me and took me back to what I experienced firsthand, but I survived it. And I think it's possible. It doesn't mean that the trends and the statistics are not valid. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, it means that, if anything, it proves it more and more. I've seen it. It's not theoretical for me. I've lived it. And I'm still standing. And so whoever it was that prayed, I appreciate that. I don't think they're here today, but I appreciate that. That's really all I wanted to say.
I don't know if this is anecdotal, but I've run into a lot of couples that are age 50, 60 getting divorced. They say, we got our kids through it. Now we're ending it. Have there been any empirical studies on that? Is that having an effect?
Institute for Family Studies has a few studies on gray divorce, but there's not a lot. We're actually working on, we did publish something with a lot of quotes from kids. And what's so interesting to me is in all these situations, first of all, they start to question their entire existence. When they're 35, they're 35 years old, and now they're going, is everything that I believed a lie? A lot of times their parents were committed Christians, and they start doubting God. Because their parents were, as God designed it to be, the object lesson of his faithfulness to his bride. And when the main object lesson breaks down, they start to go, well, can God be faithful to me? Can he really? But I think the thing that I see the most starkly is now you put so much pressure on the parents that usually have kids in their home that they're raising, but now they're also caregiving for their parents. When the parents would have cared for each other, now that one daughter who's 38 and has 4 young kids now is dealing with dad's health issues and mom's new relationship and all of mom's, right? So she has to be the adult in all the different directions. So that's what I hear the most, is this massive amount of stress that's put on adult children of divorce.
What would be your organization's position regarding co-parenting structures in a divorce situation? In Tennessee, there's been a trend to start parents that are divorcing at 50-50, whereas historically that had been one parent is primary and one parent is alternate. What is a child's right? I would be of the mindset that they need to have a place of permanence and not equalize the time with the parents as much, but could be that that's misguided based on research. I wanted to know what you had to say.
Well, ideally, the kids stay in the house and the parents move in and out. I mean, that actually would disincentivize quite a bit of divorce if it was the parents who had to transfer their place of residence every 3 days or every other week or whatever it is, right? It's a lot easier to foist that onto kids. I don't know about that. The truth is there's no real good solution after this, but I will say that 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and the majority of divorces are not because of abuse. 70%, around 2/3 to 70%, depending on the study, break up low conflict marriages where it wasn't abuse, it wasn't adultery, there wasn't some fault. It was usually, women have higher emotional needs. They tend to be dissatisfied first. Men tend to be happy, they just want to live at peace and eat and have sex and just they have a lower threshold. Really, they do. And so that's why we see women responsible for 70% of divorces. And these are not women escaping abusive marriages. They're not. And I will say that when there is a default that the woman will then get the majority of custody, there's less incentive for her to put the brakes on. So to me, I would say 50-50 is not bad, because the mom has to go into it going, I'm not automatically going to get everything that I want. But I don't know. Honestly, the kids lose no matter what.
My wife and I were members of a predominantly Black church for a number of years, and there was a phrase that was used a lot, that the preacher has gone from preaching to meddling.
Oh yeah, that's
and clearly in the sermon today, Jesus was meddling deeply in this woman's life. Do you have any opinions about how quickly and how thoroughly ministers should get into situations where there's a divorce happening, or let's say there's visitors to the church that aren't married that have the same address, and how much meddling or should they consider?
So I will say that it's very bizarre that I am activisting, because on the truth teller, grace giver spectrum, like all of you guys probably know which one you are. You're either like ready to just tell the truth all the time about whoever walks through the doors, or you're like, I want to keep the peace. I don't want to ruffle feathers. Like, I don't really, it's like speaking up on something hard, like makes you tremble. I'm over here. I'm a grace giver. It's very hard for me to get to the point where I confront somebody, especially in their personal life. I mean, I've learned to do it on Twitter, but I kind of avoid a lot of that too. I mean, when people rebut something that I say, a lot of times I'm like, I'll just let it go. I don't want to argue. So what I find as the grace giver is, what helps me to know what to say is being an expert. It's very hard for me to know, like, to me, a relationship situation where there's a struggling marriage, or somebody's recently divorced, or somebody is dealing with infertility or whatever it is. I want to maintain relationship. It's very, very easy for me to pull them in and love them. But then I feel like it's a game of double dutch where the jump ropes are going and I'm like, should I get in now? How about now? Like, should I say something now? And like, I don't know sometimes, but what really, really helps me is knowing more about this than everybody else. Not just from a biblical perspective, but having the stories of kids in my head who experienced divorce, saying, if you do this, there's a 50% chance your kid's going to, in essence, develop a split personality. You're actually increasing their risk of suicide. You're shortening their lifespan. That's what you're doing. So I don't tend to start those conversations. I am not like Jesus. I'm like, how many husbands you got there? But when they bring it up, I want to be ready with information, not just from the word of God, but from the world of God, right? Where I can say, this is what we know from God's world is going to be the reality of your children's life if you follow this path. And the word of God affirms that, this is what is good, true, and beautiful. So that's my grace giver answer is I just think all you guys should know more about this than everybody else. You should be the authority on all these topics, everything from reproductive technologies to unrelated adults cohabiting to IVF. You guys should know more about this than everybody else. I personally don't start the conversation, but I finish it.
You mentioned a lot of the reasons why these non-biblical forms of relationship are dangerous is because of having a non-biological parent in the household. I'm wondering what your perspective is on the role of community in raising families. Our American world, we tend to just be very nuclear. You don't talk to your neighbors, your family doesn't live with you, but other cultures vastly outside this country, you have your aunts and uncles living in the house together. Even in the biblical world that Jesus lived in, you just added on a place to that. So how does that, or does that have a negative effect on the household when there is a non-related adult as part of this family communal unit living with the house?
Well, you don't necessarily want to bring the unrelated adult into your home unless you have really, really vetted them. And that goes for roommates situations that can even be like distant extended family that you're not really looking at very carefully. But I will say that we do need to recognize that the nuclear family, right? Mother, father, child. Okay, so that is the primary triad, mother, father, child. That's what we would consider the nuclear family. And that is the foundation. You don't get anything else unless you get the nuclear family. Start with the nuclear family. But for example, Yoram Hazony, who is one of the leading voices in conservatism, says, I don't talk about the nuclear family. I talk about the traditional family, the one that is surrounded with multi-generational, the one that does do this together as a community. All of us need to be in it together. And so I love that. I just am a little bit cautious when people critique the nuclear family, right? And say, well, the nuclear family is a Western invention, because usually they're doing it because they want to undo the 4 norms of marriage, where rather we need to retain the 4 norms of marriage in that basic triad, but then continue to hold on to those bonds of extended family as well. So yeah, I literally am like, Mom, when are you going to move into my basement? Get in here. And especially when my kids were little, the only time, even though I have a very supportive husband, the time when I really, really slept when I had an infant is when my mom was over. Mm-hmm. So yeah, sign me up for the extended family, that community. Yeah. But when it involves unrelated adults, you scrutinize them.
I'm a chaplain in the National Guard. Have you ever given this kind of a presentation within the military? Because half of my counselings that I do is all about this, at least.
My husband just became a chaplain in the Navy because we don't have enough going on in our life. So no, I haven't. But at some point, I would not be surprised if that came up. He is very well positioned to speak into the lives of sailors because marriage-related issues, parenting issues. He's got me as a wife, so he's got all the data. So my guess is there will be some point where we're going to be able to share this together, maybe. But yeah, I'm very grateful that he's feeling pulled to that community because I know that they are under very distinct pressures and stresses.
Thank you very much. Ms. Katy Faust.